Hi guys, this is Mrs. Rutan. Welcome to the Beloved Preview and Background Information Guide. I'm going to click through the presentation for some audio, or you could look through it yourself, but I will be offering some extra tips and advice as I read through. So we're going to start Beloved. It is an extended learning opportunity. It has a couple things that you want to know background. There is a disclaimer. This has got tough stuff in it. Just like Kite Runner, just like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and The Handmaid's Tale, it's got tough discussions in literature and parts of humanity that you gotta kind of push through. So please stay engaged. Don't give up when it gets too personal or difficult or uncomfortable. This book takes place just after slavery, and so when it comes down to it, slavery is a tough part of history and historical literature. Please speak the truth, even if you don't feel comfortable about it. It's going to talk about racism because it is about slavery and the author herself is black. You're going to experience some discomfort because the book is about transforming some of the things you understand in your belief system. And finally, expect and understand that this could just be one opportunity to learn and continue learning about different aspects of literature, especially some of the historical parts of our American history. So why do I like reading Beloved? Beloved has got some complex stuff going on. It's really great. It taught me a lot about trauma and history, culture, family, how we view our past. And it does focus in on slave narrative, but it's not even that. It's just human or people narrative. I really enjoy the ghost story aspects of it, that historical aspect, and it is beautifully written. It has poetry and prose in it. The way that she writes is very poetic, but it's still a novel. So hopefully it hits on Q1, Q2, and Q3. This quote you can read on your own. The overview is once again, it's got this supernatural quality to it that's really interesting. It is based on a true story. Obviously, she takes a lot of liberties with it. I really enjoy the discussion of the house and the setting because that is important in narrative. We saw that with Pride and Prejudice. Even the idea of the American dream. And do pay attention to the narration. The narration changes quite a bit. And it goes from a God perspective to more just one-on-one and even first-person narrative. And that change in point of view is just her way of capturing as many slavery voices as possible. So what's in this PowerPoint? I got some background, characters, some themes, symbols, and then this discussion of something called magical realism. So, just so you know, in the middle, this is Miss Morrison. She did pass away, I believe, in 2019. She was a very talented writer. She wrote lots and lots of fiction, lots of short stories, and just different pieces of literature. She did win the Nobel Peace Prize for her work. She sets this in Reconstruction. It is after the Civil War, and it's after the slaves have been free. And it kind of looks at that complexity because it's not as simple as they just earn their freedom. This picture right here depicts kind of an African-American family trying to establish themselves. And I like this quote. Morrison creates a powerful commentary on the psychological and historical legacy of slavery. Next, I want you to think about the characters. There's a lot of different characters, and also places kind of act like a character, or they're definitely crucial to the story. So the house itself is actually one of the first lines in the book. 124 Bluestone Road is in Ohio. This is where our main character lives. This is the home they established right as they ran away from slavery and also during the Reconstruction period. Seth, or Sethe, there's different ways you can pronounce her name. She's the mom. She's described pretty vividly. She's got iron eyes, which I think could already characterize her. She's the mother of 4 children. Denver is her only child that still lives with her. Howard and Burglar are her boys who have left the home. And then Beloved and Baby Ghost obviously is no longer alive, but is kind of a presence in the house. Baby Ghost, Beloved, there's lots of different names for the ghost. Is described as not evil, but kind of sad, but not sad. And there's just different ways the characters view Baby Ghost. I think it depends on who they are. But it is a pretty intricate part of the house and the relationships. There's Denver. There's my beautiful picture of Baby Ghost. This could be a representation of the house. And then this is Seth. And there's a part in the book where you read about this, and then this line, they took my milk. Important themes in this book. You're going to read a lot about memories, trauma, the past, present, and future, because Toni Morrison looks at how do free slaves handle their past. It's kind of like Holocaust history. Just because the Jewish people were free from their imprisonment doesn't mean that everything just kind of resolved itself. How does slavery impact the generations, the current and future generations? How does trauma shape a generation? Relationships and intimacy, the love types are also explored, and these things show up in chapter 1. But how do people connect or distance themselves due to the relationships or past experiences? And what does intimacy mean? There's intimacy with Sethe and Paul D, but there's also intimacy between mother and child. How does that play out in the book? Some more characters to think about. Sweet Home is another setting location. This is actually the plantation. So you're only going to see this in flashbacks. But Sethe lives on by running away from Sweet Home, but there's actually quite a lot of positive memories. There were 6 main slaves that lived there, and that's kind of her pseudo family. Paul D, Paul F, Paul A. Hal was her husband. Sisco is, I believe he's like Native American or described as a wild man, and then Sethe herself. The gardeners are the slave owners. They are considered nice, and I put that in quotes, but they're not as brutal as some of the slave owners at the time period. School teacher is a horrific character that you'll get to meet, the antagonist. This is the couple that are married, and baby Suggs is Hal's mother. And so what happens is Sethe runs to Ohio to get to baby Suggs, who has either bought, I can't remember if she's bought her freedom or already had her freedom. She's dead, but you will see her show up. And then Paul D is going to be the love interest. He's an old friend, but he conflicts a lot with Denver and Baby Ghost. He has his own history. Some other things to consider. There's this choke tree symbolism. It looks just like this. That's on the back of Sethe's back. The dehumanization and the violence that comes with some of the slave memories are going to be pretty prevalent. And then there's tons of biblical allusions and African American culture aspects that are kind of unique. And Bible stuff is pretty prevalent because a lot of slaves used Christianity and the church to kind of survive the trauma and the terror they went through. So why Ghost? I think you need to think about that because this book is supernatural. And what happens is it seems weird, but we love ghosts. I mean, look at our media and our films. We tend to enjoy ghost movies. I like this quote right here. In literature, the ghost is almost always a metaphor for the weight of the past. I don't believe in them in a traditional sense. This person looks at them more like what could they represent or symbolize. Ghost stories are a literature of loneliness and longing. Death is a mystery, comfort is scarce, but we will play with our bereavements. We will invent little amusements that explode with sorrow, and thus we armor ourselves against the inevitable loss. Ghosts are a way to cope. This is a really, really cool book that I read this past year. Sing Unburied Singing. It's very reminiscent of this book, and so I've noticed that ghosts can be used in African American culture to help express some of the things that have been experienced. And in this book, there's a ghost. It's a ghost of a boy who was in a prison system that kind of haunts different people and different family members. So, as you read, this is my tip. Let your mind relax. Just feel the story. Go through the sensory of the story and the folklore of this kind of like weird, supernaturally kind of aspect of the story, because it's what I would call lyrical prose. Lyrical, that's a vocab word. It's more musical, or it's more like a dance or a feeling and expression. And so it can be a little bit weird. If you've ever listened to The Who also kind of has some aspects of that. Like The Who were really prevalent during Vietnam, and a lot of the music. So I'm going to play about a minute of this. So those are helicopter blades. I'm going to fast forward. So you can listen to more of that on your own time, but as you notice, it's kind of surreal. And it's hard. It's hard to read pieces of literature like that, kind of like what Chief did with his weird narration, but it helps show that experience or those feelings more than anything. Finally, let's talk magical realism. So take a minute, look at this picture, and you see it's just like the Who song. It just kind of takes you into a place where you're like, whoa, what's going on? Your brain kind of changes its understanding. Her book is magical realism. So it is a literary movement. It's also been considered an artistic movement. You take magic and supernatural and you put it in an ordinary or mundane setting. So they live in this house in Ohio, which is pretty ordinary, but then you have this weird stuff that happens that kind of makes the background like contrast or some juxtaposition. The outcome of post-colonial writing. So remember, colonialism is like setting up little societies and overtaking places like Africa. And what would happen is this is a response to that. And a lot of it is there's two separate identities or realities in magical realism that are challenged in post-colonial, because in post-colonial literature you have the conquerors, the people who like set up their new societies, like the British taking over little islands, and then you have those that are conquered, which would be the natives. The time in magical realism is not linear, so it's going to bounce around a lot. What happens is very subjective, like it's not a clear cause and effect situation, it's more people reflecting themselves. The magic and the ordinary are one and the same. Like they accept the magical stuff as real. So the ghost is pretty understated. Now we would say, what the heck, there's a ghost in this house. But for Sethe and her family, it's normal. And it helps us understand that there is more power in emotions rather than making things so black and white. Moving forward, you've seen magical realism like this, right? Like there's ways, it's more about a feeling, it's more about like interpretation. What does this mean? You know, how does time melt? How do things that supposedly need to look like horses not really look like horses anymore? I mean, this bug stuff kind of creeps me out. And so it's more of feelings, the feelings of the magical realism versus like what is actually happening. This is Dolly. He did a lot of unconsciousness, and that creates imagination and subconscious, which, think about it, if you've been through trauma or if you're somebody who's endured the time period of slavery, you're going to have some subconscious stuff that you've tried to suppress that will sometimes pop up. This is Mrs. Hall gave me this recommendation. Surrealists also can kind of be like magical realism. This is Ivan Albright. And this is, I believe, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, I think, or Frankenstein. But do you see how he looks real, but yet he's made of gross stuff, and it's just kind of really intense. Oh, I love this. This is going to be, oh my gosh, her name is escaping me right now. But her stuff, Frida, there we go, is, do you see how it's not supposed to be literal? Like people cannot live with, I don't know, stems coming out of them, but it kind of represents life or the extension of life. In this, it's this connection between two people, cutting the connection. And then this is another one where I think this has a lot of nods to the Garden of Eden, which sometimes Bible is considered magical realism because it's just this kind of not supernatural, but just unknown stuff that actually feels real or is accepted as real. So when you guys start to read Beloved, understand that it has a writing style. If you watch this little video, this is from The Gladiator, which won an Oscar. He is having flashbacks of reuniting with his wife and child. And if you notice, it's more sensory. So for instance, he's touching the grain. It's more about what he feels